I'm not trying to tell anybody what their personal philosophies around marriage or singlehood or dating or raising a family should be. But since it's a hot topic, here's another one of my opinions. There is a contingent of people out there for whom marriage is not the goal. It is not considered to be the end all be all culminating experience of life. They aren't looking forward to it necessarily. Some even consider it to be a concept that is obsolete. I personally have experienced marriage, and I understand that it definitely has its advantages legally and in some ways, for the purpose of raising a stable family unit. I don't think that it is the only way that one can raise a stable family unit, but for the society in which we live, if you want to fit into the ready-made cultures that tend to exist around us, it can be one of the easiest ways to integrate and, build a stable foundation for a family and a future. In this day and age, it's real easy to get lost in the sauce of all the talk about high value men and high value women and whether or not hypergamy is the way to achieve the most successful and long lasting and productive relationship. But if you've been watching my other videos, you know about those other people that I mentioned, the ones that we don't often see on screen, those other people that are out happily living their lives, or at least, just out there doing their thing, trying to find the right answers for themselves without their stories being so widely expressed and heard on these kinds of platforms. And as a woman who experienced a decade of marriage, had my children, my boy, my girl, my complete set, and was done, as a 43-year-old free woman, I am here to not necessarily speak for others who are in a similar place in life as me, but to, speak to some of our perspectives. We've been there and done that when it comes to marriage. We've paid our debt to society. We did what everybody told us to do in terms of that traditional path that we were expected to follow. And we found that it was not the best fit for us for whatever reasons. While marriage may never be in the cards for us again, life is still pretty damn good, and it can continue to be. Life is simply too nuanced, too complex, too full of color and texture for people like me to be satisfied with the standard narrative. We've been there, we've done that, we tried it, and we are throwing off those fetters in order to experience a life that we consider to be more expanded. However, because I can still recognize that there is value in the institution of marriage. A few years ago, I did a video about the history of marriage, its origins, and why it was invented as a legal and a social concept. It contains a lot of really good nuggets that I think you should look into. And these are the kinds of things that I think anybody should understand about the institution of marriage. Not what your pastor told you was the will of God, not what you feel, when the love bugs get to flying around, fluttering around, in your stomach along with those lovely butterflies. I'm talking about the history and the practical, pragmatic notions that surround what this institution is. If you're going to jump in, you need to know what it's about. So take a look in these next few moments. The video is kind of long, but again, there's a lot of nuggets in there, a lot of jewels for contemplation for anyone who has been married, is planning to get married, is maybe thinking of throwing away the idea of marriage altogether, maybe setting out on a different path in life. I think it's good for all of us to understand why this institution was created, why we are taught to move in that direction from a very young age, why it is considered to be the widespread norm, despite such a high failure rate after all this time. As for me, nothing's set in stone. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. I would never say never. I am not rejecting all potential options for my future, right? But I'm at a place where I recognize that there is significant power in not being desperate. My biological clock is not ticking my ear off. The content that so many of us creators are presenting to you are intended to help you overcome the overfunctioning and the codependency and the desperation and the falling on the altar of love and the hope of a lifetime of happily ever after. That illusion that so many people, let's just call it what it is, that illusion that so many people are victim to. No matter what perspective we come from, many of us have the intention of helping you to experience your life and to experience your relationships and your connections, whatever you may consider them to be, whether they be short term or long time, to approach them from a place of power and personal sovereignty so that you can experience the relationships and the overall life that you want to live. To get closer to some answers to these questions, it is critical that we understand the history of marriage and hypergamy. It's necessary for us to understand the reason why these concepts were invented. And I think we should understand how the ideas of marriage and hypergamy have danced with one another over the course of history. To that end, I'll give you a couple of quick definitions. From the Merriam-Webster Dictionary,
marriage is the state of being united as spouses in a consensual and contractual relationship recognized by law, while hypergamy is marriage into an equal or higher caste or social group.
Now, I know there are some different schools of thought on just how a woman should practice hypergamy, how high up she should date or marry. But just know that the essential fundamental definition of hypergamy does include marrying someone of equal class, status, financial background. That is included in the definition of hypergamy. As long as financial stability and social upward mobility are maintained or built upon, that is hypergamy. Now, I do want to call your attention to the spelling of the word hypergamy. If you study the etymology of that word, you will find that the deeper meaning is
hyper, meaning above, and gamy, meaning marriage or fertilization, a union. So hypergamy is marrying above one station, or technically even simply mating above one station.
Now look even closer at that suffix gamy at the end of the word, that G-A-M-Y. We find that suffix in other words like monogamy, bigamy, polygamy, hypogamy. These are all words that refer to different types of union. Now what does that gamy look like to you? That's right. Game. That G-A-M-Y resembles the word game, and there's a reason for that.
You see, herein lies a historical relationship with the Middle English word gammon, meaning joy, amusement, pleasure, sport. Well, it's not hard to understand why a union would be considered pleasurable, right? But sport implies competition. Sport implies that there are winners and losers. Maybe sometimes there are ties, but that's rare. Sport implies that one must be fit, mentally and physically, to perform well or even to perform at all. Sport implies that one must engage in regular conditioning to remain at their best until the games are over. If not, there is potential for elimination, for trading among teams, all notions that don't generally come to mind when we think about our modern idea of marriage.
But it's all in the game. You can think of monogamy as single-player sport, of polygamy as multiplayer sport, like marriage Olympics. You can think of hypergamy as high-level sport, like professional poker or pro basketball played in a state-of-the-art arena with high-dollar payouts. And you can think of hypogamy, marrying down, as low-level sport, like stickball in a dirt field out back. Now, history tells us that some degree of pair bonding has always existed for the sake of procreation and just for companionship. But the formal contractual marriage that we know of today wasn't invented until around the advent of agriculture, when humans went from being hunter-gatherers, kind of foraging off the land, going from place to place to find sustenance, to settling down, settling land, and amassing resources. Once that happened, well, there was a need to protect those resources. And you could say that the protection of those resources and the power and stability that they afforded literally became sport. But before I get too deep into that, I want to touch on something else real quick. Did anybody else study art in school? Are you familiar with the painter Thomas Cole? No? Just ride with me for a minute. Thomas Cole was famous for a series of paintings in the 1800s that depicted what he believed to be the natural cycles of rising and falling that various empires experience over the course of history. The series was called The Course of Empire, and it basically depicts an empire's rise and fall over the course of 5 stages.
The first is the savage state, where a man in a loincloth runs through an untamed wilderness hunting a deer. It depicts the raw, natural world that existed before civilization. This is the time of the hunter-gatherer. Next is the pastoral state. The raw, natural land has been tamed. The hunter-gatherers have settled into being farmers and boat builders who own land and want more. They are preparing to explore and conquer the world. Then we have the consummation of empire. The once humble society is now having its heyday. This period is marked by an abundance of resources and general prosperity. I mean, look at all these people turning up. You got people dancing, lounging in the fountains. Buildings are spectacular, showing that the technology is definitely on point. We got running water on deck, these amazing boats carrying goods back and forth. It's good times. This civilization is clearly at the top of its game. And then something happens. Decline. Destruction. While everybody was having a good time, enemy soldiers invaded the city and wreaked havoc. Those same prosperous people who were dancing and lounging in the warmth of the afternoon sun now lie dead amid crumbling buildings and raging fires. And finally, we have desolation. Another civilization has bitten the dust. Only ruins remain. Nature is already reclaiming the land, and the opposing empire, which destroyed this one, is now having its temporary heyday somewhere else.
What does all of this have to do with marriage as we know it today? Well, remember what I said about why marriage was invented, when it was invented. Once humans settled down, that was pretty much like our pastoral state. We had different groups of people and individuals had amassed enough resources that they saw fit to set up systems to protect those resources. And in many societies, the wealth was passed down through the men, through the male line, and men wanted a way of ensuring that their resources were being passed down to people who were actually their children, actually their true heirs. This is the reason why it was okay for men to have multiple wives, concubines, mistresses, partners, and whatever else, but women had to be devoted to their husbands because that gave the husband some sense of a guarantee that the children that she bore to him were his. Just follow the money. That's what it's always about.
However, there were and still are some societies where wealth is handed down through women. And in some of those societies, the method of handing down resources appears to be very efficient. Simply put, one wife per family. Within a single household, there is only one woman having children, and she, of course, can only have so many children in a lifetime, so the resources she passes down will remain significantly intact because there won't be so many people trying to divvy them up. And if this woman wants more than one husband, that's okay too.
Now, a society like this might produce less children, but it also serves the purpose of population control, so you don't end up with so many kids running around that nobody wants to take care of. And I guess in a society like that, the onus would be on the men to practice hypergamy. Anyway.
Which brings me to the industrial age. For the purpose of this analogy, I like to think the industrial age was our consummation of empire here in the West. There were major advances in technology. People were able to come out of the fields and get factory jobs, and this eventually led to the creation of a middle class. People were able to amass their own small fortunes.
And even though we have not reached what some people would consider to be full equality, we definitely can see that in our times now, more and more women have entered the workforce, have been successful in the workforce to the extent that individual women have been able to create their own small fortunes. And we do see a lot more men in our society now practicing what some would consider to be hypergamy by dating, mating, and marrying up with these women. But that does seem to be problematic in the sense that it does seem to throw off the gender balance that helps to create stability in a lot of what I will say heterosexual relationships. I'm not going to get into a long drawn out discussion about gender. I've made it clear what my stance is. I think that certain biological processes just never change, no matter how evolved we think we are, no matter how much things genuinely do change. For the most part, I think that there is a gender harmony that helps to create stability within heterosexual relationships. So now we understand three things. That one, marriage was not designed to be a vehicle for romance and love, but a vehicle for wealth and stability. That two, hypergamy is not new. It's about as old as the institution of marriage itself. And three, marriage and hypergamy were not so much biological imperatives, although they were to an extent biological imperatives. They were just as much economic imperatives. Marriage was needed to preserve resources among families, and hypergamy was the sport that united the best man or woman with the best heirs, so that those resources could live long into the future. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who think that marriage was invented as an institution of love and that it's supposed to be about love, but expecting marriage to produce or even sustain love is like expecting a cow to produce chocolate milk. It just wasn't designed for that. And the divorce rate and the number of dysfunctional marriages that actually stay intact, I think, show proof of this. If undying love and perennial romance are what you want, you don't need marriage for that. And I think a lot of people, particularly in our day and age, are coming to that understanding. In fact, marriage can oftentimes get in the way of the love that you're hoping to experience, especially if you're a woman.
You may want to check out Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel for deeper understanding.
Men are generally not capable of the type of love that a lot of women want. They aren't designed for it and they aren't socialized for it. So you really shouldn't hold your breath for it. The idea is unrealistic, and it unfortunately leads a lot of women to live their lives in a complete state of being out of touch with reality.
Few people understood that better than the poets of medieval France, the troubadour poets. They were the ones largely responsible for inventing our modern notions of romance and chivalry. I mean, think about the way the French and the Parisians in particular are considered by some to be the most romantic people on the planet. In the troubadour poetry, the troubadours described the escapades of queens and noblewomen who fulfilled their marital and political duties to their husbands while fulfilling their desires with the knights of the royal court. Ever heard of King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot?
Now, only women in positions of power were allowed this little extra dalliance. But extramarital affairs have always been recognized, albeit privately, as common, inevitable, and even necessary. Elite women had knights and the like. Elite men had mistresses, concubines, to their heart's content. It was the less wealthy and the poor who had the bright idea to start marrying for love. And so far we can see how that's working out. You can't get chocolate milk from a cow. But there are a lot of people out there, who understand that. They understand the original purpose for which marriage was invented, and they know how to use the tool, the sport of hypergamy, to obtain entry into higher social classes, or to at least use it to maintain their place in stable social classes, in stable income brackets, so that if they do choose to have children, those children will have access to all of the privileges that those things afford. And if they choose not to have children, they will at least be able to be a stable pillar within the community that they serve. This brings me to two important traditions that are often not mentioned in this modern day discussion of hypergamy. And I think a lot of times it's not mentioned because they are two practices that are considered to be primitive, but they still are practiced in different parts of the world. And I think that they do shed some light on the idea of marriage and can give us a little bit more insight into the traditions of marriage and hypergamy. Those two traditions are
dowry and bride price.
the topic of hypergamy gets under a lot of people's skin because it deals with the convergence of two ideas that people think are supposed to be diametrically opposed, love and money. Well, I've already mentioned what I think about where love's place is in marriage, but because a lot of people believe that love is an essential aspect of marriage, they think that money should not be a consideration, or that it should not be much of a consideration. And unfortunately, a lot of people have been trained to believe that money is the root of all evil. And of course, that is a complete misquote of that biblical scripture, but I won't get too much into that. They believe that money is evil. They believe that wanting money is bad, even though it is the thing that makes this world go around and that it's necessary to live. So it causes a lot of problems when people bring up the topic. And then there are people out there who argue that a woman's desire to secure the most stable mate who can provide the best possible conditions for her and their community or their offspring is simply an application of wisdom and pragmatism. Then you have the men on the opposite end of that spectrum, some men and some women as well, who really get upset and who say, well, what is it that the woman brings to the table? Why is it that she should expect to be secure and stable and to live a good life with a husband who provides those things for her? Well, in some societies, a woman brought a dowry to the table. I know, I was confused too. I used to think that dowry was the money or the collection of valuables that a man brought to a woman's family in exchange for her hand in marriage, right? But that is actually known as bride price. That was the money or collection of valuables that a man typically brought to a farmer or a laborer's family. It was practiced among the less wealthy, typically among the less wealthy people, still is today. And it basically operates under the idea that a woman's family is losing a valuable asset when she leaves their home, when their daughter leaves their home, because she has been laboring in the fields or, doing something within the family ecosystem to produce resources that the family needs. So the husband-to-be would give that family a bride price when he wanted her hand in marriage in order to help make them whole, in order to help secure them in her absence. Dowry, on the other hand, was typically practiced by wealthier people, and it was essentially the down payment that a woman's family made on her intended marriage to an eligible bachelor. Yeah, that's right. Families who could afford to saved up for their daughters' marriages like we save today for college. And when she found that eligible bachelor and he made it clear that he wanted to marry her, her family would hand over this, which was her inheritance, to her fiance. I guess you could say that today, when parents save up and send their daughters to college in order to prepare them for their later lives, that's kind of like an indirect dowry. Anyway, gentlemen, don't get too excited because the ladies still have an ace in the hole on this one. The inheritance was given to her fiance, and later as her husband, he would be the head of household and he would be administering that inheritance. This involved him keeping it safely tucked away and only using it if she or the children needed it. It was supposed to be like an insurance policy. It had to basically be kept in escrow, separate from the household finances, and only taken out if he left her, if he died, or if there was some critical household need that he absolutely could not cover without that money. There may have been a few odds and ends included, like furniture or family heirlooms that could be used in the couple's home, but it was understood strictly that those things belonged to her. The family's goal was to show the fiancé that this young woman had backup, or this young girl had backup, and that if anything happened to her, she would be secure. The parents had done their part to help secure her future. But since for the time being, he was taking responsibility for her as head of household, he would be the one to administer her trust. Now, this tradition was practiced all over the world. The tradition is recorded from China to South America, from Egypt to Greece, from ancient India to Mesopotamia. In the Code of Hammurabi, it's actually mentioned. In Babylonia, if a man divorced his wife without a good reason, he had to give back the dowry with interest in the form of a bride price. I guess you could call that old school alimony. Cheaper to keep her. So even though the woman was expected to bring something to the table, it was understood that what she brought to the table was hers. It was intended to be for her own security and for the security of any children they might have. It was understood that they lived in a world where men, by nature and by societal norms, were given significant advantages. And if men also wanted the advantage of wives, the onus was on them to ultimately make sure their wives were secure. And considering the fact that lovey love and fidelity would likely never be a part of the picture, what else were they to give their wives? So we come back to the question of whether or not marriage and hypergamy are still relevant today. Do we still live in a world where men are given significant advantages? Do Black women in particular find themselves in that, grappling with that state of affairs? Let's go back to the course of empire. And by the way, my analogy to this series of paintings is purely theoretical, but humor me, because I think it makes a lot of sense. If the savage state was our state as hunter-gatherers, as foragers off the land, the pastoral state was us as farmers, the consummation of empire occurred somewhere around the Industrial Revolution, maybe even all the way through World War II, then could we say that the information age that we find ourselves in now is something like the destruction? Or at least the deconstruction, when old values, faith systems, and authorities are being abandoned wholesale in favor of different ideas, when traditional family structures are becoming less visible, or I guess less favored, and non-traditional family structures are becoming more visible and more prevalent, when currency even is being questioned like never before, leading to things like Bitcoin, and when terrorism, domestic and that from without, threatens to destroy everything. Now, I'm not one to cry that the sky is falling, that everything is going to hell in a handbasket. Humans have known these cycles of rise and decline for eons, since the beginning of time. But I do see the shifting sands. I do see times changing. And that's why I think that the question that people have been asking themselves more and more nowadays, and asking each other about the relevancy of marriage and hypergamy, they're valid questions. For me personally, the answer of whether or not marriage is relevant, whether or not hypergamy is the way to go, those answers have always been yes. Even before I knew what hypergamy was, that's what I was doing because that's how I was raised, and that is what seemed to make the most sense. But for the society at large, I will say this. Times change, and we have made significant progress, that needed to be made in a lot of different areas. But human progress does not follow a straight line. And I still think we have a long way to go before wealth and stability are no longer factors in our world. I also think we have a long way to go before this is no longer a man's world, where the lion's share of the most sought after advantages are held by men. I also don't think that people are going to stop having babies anytime soon. Marriage was designed to be a structure for resource building and stability. Hypergamy was the way for women to obtain this. The two concepts are married. And let me tell you, the marriage between these two is all business. It ain't stuck on love bugs, Hershey kisses, and baby cupids. These two are about their money, and ain't nothing getting in the way of that. Sure, marriage is yet another flawed man-made system, but the fact remains that money is a leading cause for divorce and conflict within intact marriages. So I'm gonna talk to the ladies for a minute. If marriage is what you want, being destitute is not an option. Wasting away your years with an eternal bachelor is not an option. Choosing a man to father your children who is irresponsible is not an option. Going down the way and finding you a build-a-bruh and marrying a broke somebody who's going to resent you for it later is not an option. If marriage is what you want, these things do not make practical sense and will cause you great harm in the long run. You know, these are the values that older women used to pass down to young girls. These are the things that charm schools and coming out events and old school traditions and rites of passage used to prepare young people for. And since our culture has largely done away with those types of things, the information is available for you now here on the interwebs. Now, if love is what you want and you are actually going to give love in return and just spread love around this world, then just go and find someone to love and be happy. But if you want marriage and family, structure, children, security, if you want to be married with more than a pot to piss in and a window to toss it out of, if you want to give the next generation or simply the community around you more than kind words, prayers, and positive vibes, then the high sport of hypergamy is a most efficient means to that end.
This is Inanna Joy, sharing a few of the things that I've learned and some things that I'm still learning with you. Thanks for jumping in the joy well with me, where we examine what it means to grow and to live and love through life's joy, pain, sunshine, or rain. In the joy well, you will follow your bliss to your purpose. You will align with your joy and live well. See you soon.